And we're recording.
We're recording. All right. My name is Dr. Anita Knight Kuhnley, and I'm here with my co-instructor, Mr. Pierre Durant, and we're here to talk with you about self-care, multiculturalism, and social justice. We'd like to start off sharing something funny because there's an old proverb that says laughter is the best medicine. And so we heard a story about an older gentleman who went to the doctor because he was having heart problems. And he talked to the doctor. Doctor gave him some advice. He went on his way. A few days later, doctor saw him walking through the park looking like he was in great spirits with a beautiful young woman. And the doctor stopped him and said, "Sir, what happened? How are you doing? You're looking like you're feeling much better." And he said, "Oh, I just followed your advice, doctor." And the doctor said, "What was that?" And he said, um, "Find a hot young mama and stay cheerful." And the doctor said, "I didn't say that." He said, "I said, you've got a heart murmur. Be careful." So that seems to highlight the importance of the listening skills, one of the skill sets that we often use as counselors. I did hear that from a pastor, so I thought that would be on our approved list.
I approve.
All right, great. Thank you, Pete. And as Pierre and I were looking through the scriptures and praying about this week's presentation and thinking about it, the scripture that came up that we both resonated with was this one from 1 John 4:20.
Yes, so it says, but if a man will say, I love God, and he hates his brother, he is lying. For he who does not love his brother who is visible, how is it possible for him to love God who is invisible? So I really think that speaks to our multiculturalism and social justice piece of today's presentation because um, it really describes what um, this phileo love, the brotherly love. What what is that like? Well, we know that here in the earthly realm that sometimes we have contention with our brothers. Sometimes, though we can have that love, we don't always display it for everyone. Or um, maybe we see some of the struggles of our neighbors and our countrymen and how and countrywomen and how they may struggle to be inclusive in their love for all brothers and sisters. And so I just thought that this scripture really tugs at the heartstrings and may even convict a little bit, but it definitely states that if you can love God who you have not seen, um, and you're not loving your brothers who you see here on earth, then there's a disconnect. And so this really encourages us to love our fellow men and women as we would to love God.
Amen to that. I think that's a really important point, and it's one of those concepts to contemplate or points to ponder. This idea of you know he who does not love his brother who is visible. How is it possible for him to love God who is invisible? This reminds me of the struggle with idolatry, people trying to create God in our own image. And we are concrete human beings. We want something we can touch and see and know. But I believe that there's probably a reason why Jesus came at a point in time where he couldn't be captured on film and photographed. And we don't know for 100% certainty exactly what he did look like. There's many different portrayals of him, and many of them, based on the science that's emerged, are probably inaccurate. Um, but I think this is important to remember that God lives inside each of us. And so to love God involves loving our brothers and sisters who are created in the image of God. It should be treated as such. So thank you for sharing that word, Pierre. That's a very I think it's a very important word, something that we can just fix our hearts on, rest our hearts in as we discuss multicultural concepts today. There was an interesting quote that we found from Robert Fulghum, the author of a book that covers this idea that he learned most of everything he needed to know in kindergarten. But it says we could learn a lot from crayons. Some are sharp, some are pretty, some are dull, some have weird names, and all are different colors. But they all fit nicely into the same box. So we all, inhabit this earth, and there's so many different differences. But there's something beautiful about those differences coming together and inhabiting that same uh, Crayola box. So I think they're inspiring in a sense. Before we jump into our discussion on social justice and multiculturalism, we also wanted to talk with you a little bit about burnout prevention and self-care. This is something that is a problem in our field. Um, you may have heard the terms compassion fatigue. You may have heard the terms burnout, but these are all concepts that are referred to in the literature that are especially relevant to the helping professions. And research suggests that there is an inverse correlation between emotional intelligence and counselor burnout. So what this means is as a counselor's emotional intelligence goes up, their tendency to burn out goes down. And so specifically, doctors John Harachand, Knight, and Kaptari did a study looking at the correlation, the relationship between trait-based emotional intelligence and the CBI, Counselor Burnout Inventory. And they found that specifically the trait factor of self-control had the strongest relationship with burnout. So the high levels of emotional intelligence in terms of the self-control factor, the lower the levels of burnout, suggesting that we could potentially help protect counselors from burnout by helping increase those emotional intelligence levels. That's something that we need further research to investigate the efficacy of that. But emotional intelligence is something that we can work on building in order to build resilience. I think Mr. Fred Rogers was a great example of what I like to call a children's television therapist who was highly emotionally intelligent. On the hierarchy in terms of ability-based emotional intelligence, the ability to regulate emotions in the self and in others is at the top of that hierarchy. And Mr. Rogers believed that if we could help children understand that feelings are mentionable and manageable, we would do a great service towards mental health. And he also believed, and he said this to Senator Pastore when he was addressing him before the Senate Subcommittee on Communication to save public television. But he said he thought that it was much more dramatic for two men to be working out their feelings of anger than to see scenes of gunfire on television. And I believe that's true, and I believe he was right, that by helping people manage, be able to mention and talk about their feelings, especially maybe some unpleasant feelings like sadness and anger, and then being able to find strategies to channel those feelings into something productive that doesn't hurt them and doesn't hurt anybody else can really make the world a better place. And that's what emotional intelligence is all about. Sangan, Janavanich, and Reynolds discuss the idea that there is a link between self-care and counselor effectiveness. And it's very interesting that those of us that are in the helping profession, we're drawn to care for others and help others. And sometimes it's harder to, even though we know that self-care is important, to take time to take care of ourselves. But this is something that can help us with burnout prevention. So what are some things that, there's an image here of the Virginia Counselors Journal. That is the VCA, Virginia Counselors Association journal. And Pierre is actually a part of the VCA. Do you want to tell them a little bit about what you do with VCA?
Yes, so I am the social media chair person for VCA. So if you see any of our events, our professional developments, if you see them on our Instagram profile, our Twitter account, or if you're a part of VCA and you're a part of our Facebook group, you'll see some of the correspondence that I'm able to push out just to communicate with members, as well as the surrounding community on what types of things that we're hosting as far as events, conventions. The convention is coming up mid-November, so look out for that and information about that. But that's my role.
Thank you for sharing that. And that's an exciting role, Pierre, because that helps keep us all up to date on what's going on with VCA so that we can take advantage of amazing opportunities like the upcoming convention. I definitely encourage students. One of the benefits this year, well, I guess it's a pro and a con, but if we look at the bright side here, one of the benefits is that you can attend the convention from anywhere because it's online. Typically, it's somewhere in the state of Virginia. So if we have students that are not from Virginia, they'd have to travel to Virginia to attend. But it's an easy one for our students that do live in Virginia, so they don't have to travel quite as far. So I definitely encourage you to visit the website, find out about attending the conference. There's going to be a lot of great presentations. Just working with my colleague, Dr. Lisa Compton today on a presentation. She's doing another presentation with another colleague. Pierre, do you know of any presentations that you recommend?
I know, I'm looking forward to seeing the whole rundown because I know of some of my colleagues who may be presenting or may have submitted proposals to present. Um, can't think of any who have told me that they're presenting for sure.
Oh,
I definitely encourage everyone to follow VCA on Twitter, follow VCA on Instagram, and then if you are a member of the Virginia Councils Association, to go ahead and extend a request to be a part of our Facebook group. We have two Facebook groups, they're both private, but one is more of a public, not public, rather a, a group just for correspondence, maybe asking questions, networking, that sort of thing. Uh, and then we also have a professional development group as well. So we're looking to get more followers so we can get more information out there and really encourage folks to come out to the convention. And when I say come out, I mean log in. We'll be using Whova, that's WHOVA.com. It's a mobile event app that we're excited to use since this is our first virtual VCA conference. So everyone look into that and follow us on all of our social media platforms as well as visiting the site for more information.
yes. So thank you for sharing that, Pierre. That's just a great opportunity to network and connect. I know everybody's going to have a practicum and internship coming up. It's a great way to get to know counselors in the field. It's also a great way to get to know other faculty members. I know Dr. Lisa Compton and I are presenting on if you have an interest in trauma and treating trauma and knowing what does Mr. Rogers have to do with trauma treatment, then that one may be interesting to you. Her nickname is Trauma Mama, so she has a lot of expertise in that and recently released a book about preparing counselors for trauma treatment. And there's a lot of great presentations coming. I always recommend getting involved there. So that's their journal. If you become a member, I believe you also get a subscription to the Virginia Counselor Journal. And then this is just a screenshot of the article that we cited here that's relevant to our discussion here. It was entitled The Impact of Emotional Intelligence on Counselor Burnout. So let's move on to, now that we know that the emotional intelligence and counselor burnout are linked, and some authors suggest enhancing emotional intelligence may protect us from burnout, let's look at what leaves people susceptible to burnout. Sometimes if a person's in a work setting where it's unclear what it takes to be successful, or there's a lack of work-life balance. I know for many of us, our time studying is or was a time where there's not as much balance. There's a lot of work to do with respect to schoolwork, and then maybe you're also working a day job as well. And so balance can be challenging. Having a high stress response, having a tendency to get easily stressed, high cortisol levels, we all know that that can make life more challenging, and little time devoted to process and recovery. One of the things that I appreciate about teaching with Pierre is that a lot of times after class, he and I, even if it's just a short walk from the classroom back to the other building, we have some time to process and discuss what happened in class and to plan for our next meeting. So that making time, even if it's carving out short pockets of time to process, can be very helpful. Having few hobbies is another thing that can leave people susceptible to burnout. Do you have any hobbies, Pierre?
So yes, I love to dance. So if there's anything regarding dancing, um, I danced since I was in high school up through college on a hip hop dance troupe.
I can't believe it, Pierre. You took mine. I was gonna say I love ballroom dancing.
Oh well, see, you have a different style than I do, but
Okay.
maybe we'll have to exchange lessons a little bit and share stylings. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, so
I'll have to find that point of intersection where the hip hop and ballroom overlap. Maybe it's in something like let's see, I don't know what kind of styles would be.
I'm
Maybe
sure
some.
there's probably a fusion out there somewhere for sure. But actually, research has shown that partner dancing can help lessen the effects of dementia, and is actually
Yes.
a preventative measure for dementia and memory loss.
Yes, and it also shows that dancing can increase the size of the hippocampus, which actually shrinks with depression. So it can literally be an antidepressant.
Oh yeah, and I would have to agree because I feel my best when I'm dancing. So um, yeah, so that's one of my hobbies as well as working out, playing basketball, and then video gaming if I have time. I have less time for that nowadays. But really, anything that makes me sweat is something that makes me feel productive, effective, and increases my wellness. So those would be a few hobbies of mine. Um,
My husband is a psychiatrist. He loves basketball as well, so we'll have to get you two together. Uh,
I don't
he,
want to. I don't want to. I think it would hurt our relationship if I embarrass your husband. But maybe.
Okay, we'll see how that goes. All right, so having few hobbies. So, it can even be nice. You notice that we're smiling, we're laughing, just thinking about the things that we enjoy doing. It can bring that sense of joy. And so having some hobbies is important. If you don't have hobbies or you don't have things that you like doing, um, you might want to go visit Martin Seligman's website. He's written a book called Authentic Happiness, and he talks about how there's a set of signature strengths. And he's considered the father of positive psychology. And if you think about what your signature strengths are, and people that spend time doing activities that are aligned with their signature strengths tend to have greater levels of happiness. So that's something to keep in mind. And then not taking time off from responsibilities. It can be very hard to achieve that work-life balance, but having some Sabbath time, having some rest time can be very beneficial. So these are some things to keep in mind when it comes to burnout prevention. Now, what if what if you've been working a whole lot, you haven't had much time off, and you're already experiencing symptoms of burnout? Sangan, Janavanich, and Reynolds recommend doing an informal self-assessment, or, where you just sort of assess yourself and look at, okay, how am I doing? What burnout symptoms am I experiencing? Am I still enjoying my work? Where am I struggling? Or even having a formal physician assessment where you meet with a psychiatrist or you meet with a counselor and you have an assessment. And with this awareness, then taking this information and then developing an actual plan, and it can be helpful to write it down and write out, okay, here's the steps we're going to take to move towards healing. And then tracking progress along the way and having routine evaluations are important. Pierre and I are also teaching a group counseling class, and students are doing DBT groups. And one of the things that participants do in DBT groups is they fill out diary cards. Pierre, do you want to share anything about those diary cards?
So when we look at diary cards, um, that those are going to be areas um, where clients can kind of write down notes about what recollections they have about the group process, and goals that they may have for the next group. They're kind of just writing down those thoughts that are materializing as they are going through group training. Um, and correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. K, add in, if you have anything else to add as well.
I think there's some different versions of, the DBT has adapted, and not everybody's using, the official version, or maybe always doing it the way Dr. Linehan has really developed it. And so some people are maybe not certified, but are using, some of the DBT intervention. So from what I've seen, some of the standard diary cards have information about mood. They'll have information about suicidal thoughts or self-harm thoughts. And one of the ideas behind the diary card, in addition to that process piece that Pierre mentioned, is also when a person comes into treatment, if they're able to, have information about their triggers, or, know what's been going on day to day, how their mood's been influenced, it makes it faster and easier for them to make progress in therapy, rather than just relying on the client's memory about how things are going. And I think the same thing is true when we look at, healing from burnout. If you just try to remember, oh, how was I doing yesterday? How did I do last week? It's harder to remember. But if you write it down and look back at it in a journal and say, oh, look, this day I rated myself a 5 on this continuum. This day I was at a 3. This day I was at a 7. And then you can look at, what was going on the day that you were at a 10, what happened that day that you felt that you were at your best. And that can really help us to alter and, make changes based on what's happening.
All right. So in addition to the previous slide, Radley et al. Suggested that creative engagement and self-expression may be effective in managing the impacts of careers in helping professions. So we kind of touched on that a little bit earlier with expressing oneself through dance, and just kind of getting active. The creative arts can provide an outlet for professional counselors who experience compassion fatigue, burnout, and vicarious trauma through clients. And so getting involved with whether that be art, whether that be dancing, and just using your creative gifts and tools may actually be found to be cathartic and self-soothing for those in the helping professions. This can actually be an active way to kind of walk out and enact self-care. And then participating in the creative process, like I said, may provide an outlet for counselors and provide that emotional release necessary to cope with the many responsibilities of managing client experiences. So another thing that I do here as a high school counselor is I am the coach for the STEP team. And so that not only is that an outlet for the students that I serve and work with, but also it's an outlet for myself. And so participating in that creative process with them, as far as creating routines, creating entire shows actually and performances, can help kind of break up some of the stressful parts of the day, and it allows me to kind of engage with students in a different way, wear a different hat, and gets the creative juices flowing. And so that may also even create ways for me to activate different parts of my brain when it comes to counseling, because I've kind of broken up that time with another type of creative process. Yeah. And then let's talk a little bit about self-care strategies for counselors in training. So Thompson et al. Recommend that counselors in training create realistic goals for success. So sometimes when we're just entering in the field, we're babies, we're learning about, okay, what does it take to be an effective and competent counselor? Sometimes we have some lofty goals for ourselves. We want to be able to sit down with a client and know exactly what they're experiencing, what they're going through, say the right thing, apply the right interventions. But creating realistic goals is what's really going to help in that kind of preventative way to say, hey, okay, well maybe I'm not gonna hit the ground running and understand every client and the difficult ones and some of these complex cases, but Um, I'd say that within this session, I want to really be present with my client. I really want to reflect back what they're experiencing and what they're feeling in an accurate way. That's a realistic goal. So the kind of here and now um, goals for success are one strategy of self care that counselors and training can employ. Additionally, emerging counselors may benefit from paying attention to aspects of training that they can control, um, such as forging strong therapeutic alliances. So, aligning themselves with mentors and supervisors who create that model of effective and competent counseling, and really working alongside them, whether that be conducting research or maybe even undertaking teaching assistantship uh, like the alliance that Dr. K and I currently work in. Forming those strong therapeutic alliances can create a bond and a model of how to be effective as an emerging counselor. And last but not least for the slide, supervisors may be able to assist in demonstrating examples of self-care strategies for supervisees within training. Uh, and so I'll quickly use Dr. K as an example. This weekend, I know that she had some social gatherings that she wanted to attend, and I thought that was great. And that was able to model for me what it looks like to really incorporate uh, the social piece, the work-life balance, and so that is a great strategy for self-care.
That's a good point, Pierre. And it can be challenging to work those things in. But we had a family friend who was celebrating a milestone birthday, so we definitely wanted to help honor that celebration. And I think you had a family member having a birthday too, so it was neat to be able to celebrate those things. So let's segue now into multicultural counseling and multiculturalism. We live in a multicultural society. We live in a world where we interact with people that are different from us. And as a counselor, if you haven't interacted yet with clients that are from a different cultural background, at some point, if you continue counseling, you will. And so we also have different agencies within the field, AMCD, and one of the purposes of our different groups that look at these cultural components are to develop competencies, to know, what do we as counselors that need to be able to do to be able to work from a culturally informed perspective. And I appreciate some of the language in the literature that's a informed sense of curiosity, because it's really important to continue to be curious about our client's background. And so if you look at the multicultural counseling competencies, there's a link here. I would encourage you to go in and read them. I think the document's only about 4 pages long total, but part 1 looks at cultural awareness of our own values and biases and talks about how important it is for us to know. So for example, I have a Cuban Italian background and was raised with a mother that was part Cuban, part Italian, a little bit of French German mixed in, and as far as the people that raised me, I was raised by a father that was from Peru. Um, and so I had that sort of multicultural household. My grandparents on one side only spoke Spanish, and my grandma on the other side, being her parents being first generation over from Italy, and her husband being Cuban, had that Italian background and also spoke Spanish. Um, so we want to know, what is our cultural background and how is that going to influence or create biases, uh, towards others and people from other cultural backgrounds. Maybe you grew up with messages from your family of origin. Maybe your parents, taught you or viewed one cultural group from a certain perspective, it's important to know those things and think about how they're influencing how we're seeing people. From a Christian worldview, we know people are created in the image of God and should be treated as such. And if we go back to the scripture that Pierre read to us as we began today, it's important to remember that we need to correct those cultural biases and view people as created in the image of God. But also knowing that there probably are going to be some biases that are there. So we need to be aware of what they are so we can take action to rectify those. And then section 2 is counselor awareness of client's worldview. So I like the idea of being, having that sense of informed curiosity, because we might take time to study a client's background, to study their culture, to study their worldview, but then we may also know that each individual is different, and there's more differences within one cultural group than there are between different cultural groups. So we still want to take that time to be inquisitive, to find out what has it been like for you growing up in this cultural background, and want to learn about their worldview, the way they see the world, themselves, and others. And then we also want to have culturally appropriate interventions and strategies. And so this document goes through some of the competencies associated with the beliefs and attitudes in each area, the knowledge that's needed, and then the set of skills. And so we would encourage you to read that and to become familiar with those multicultural competencies. Now, as far as the way our text defines multiculturalism, or multicultural competence is defined as the extent to which a psychotherapist is actively engaged in the process of self-awareness, obtaining knowledge, and implementing skills in working with diverse individuals. In addition to multicultural competence, there's increasing focus in our society on the idea of advocacy. And advocacy can take a lot of different forms. We can advocate for particular groups. We can advocate for a specific client. We can advocate for our profession as a whole. I wanted to use one example because it just came up a couple of days ago. And one of the counseling agencies that I'm a part of is called AMCA, the American Mental Health Counseling Association. And one of the strong suits of AMCA is they are excellent at advocacy. And so there was a bill, the House of Representatives approved S-785, sending and I'm going to share a quote here from the article, sending a major VA mental health and counseling bill to President Trump for signature. The bill is the most significant new legislation for the counseling profession in over a decade, and a tremendous advancement for mental health counselors working for the federal government, and particularly the Department of Veterans Affairs. This historic legislation directs the U.S. Office of Personnel Management to create the first ever federal government classification for mental health counselors, referred to as an occupational series. The series will allow counselors to work in federal government agencies under the title of mental health counselor, instead of generic series that apply to many professions. Social workers and psychologists have had their own occupational series for decades, and it is past time counselors have the same level of recognition. Creation of an occupational series for mental health counselors has been a top federal priority for national counseling organizations for many years and is a hard-won success. So praise the Lord for that. That's a win for our profession. And so one of the things I like about AMCA is they often have a day on the Hill. So when I've gone to their conference in Washington, D.C., we have taken a day to go to the Capitol to meet with our representatives and our senators and to advocate for the profession. So this has been a small handful of us, but I've gone there with colleagues and we've spoken with our representatives and talked about specific bills advocating for the counseling profession. And each representative we spoke with and each senator said, I've never heard about this. No one's ever mentioned this to me. No one's ever brought it up. So as a profession, we need to continue to focus on improving our advocacy for the profession, also for our clients in general, for underrepresented or marginalized people groups. We know that psychologists and social workers have done a great job at advocating for their profession. and oftentimes get paid at higher rates than counselors, and have more open doors in some senses. So this is a place we'll continue to improve and to work on, but that is one win in this area.
So let's talk a little bit about social justice advocacy, right? So in 2014, a committee was created to update the multicultural counseling competencies in multicultural and social justice counseling competencies. And so with expanding that social justice piece, that is going to incorporate balancing individual counseling with social justice advocacy. Um, we know that is key to working with clients in marginalized groups and the issues that they face. And so advocating for our role is huge. And we see that we're making strides toward, um, you know, toward growing our profession in our field. But also we want to advocate and really garner justice for groups who have been oppressed, who have faced oppression, who may be suffering from mistreatment due to systemic fixtures or institutions in our society. And so as counselors, we want to be able to work with folks from some of those marginalized groups to understand the historic representation that they have had in society and how that affects them on a larger scale and even on a day-to-day level. So one important aspect of counseling practice is to integrate social justice advocacy and the various modalities of counseling. So not only the individual level, but also in the family systems level. And so understanding what it means to be a family living in a low socioeconomic community has its own challenges and issues. And so really being able to kind of work with families and how they are affected even in an economic sense is a piece of social justice, and how we can bring awareness to that. We can work with families and communities to support them from a social justice standpoint. So I want to leave you with something to contemplate, a concept to contemplate. How might you utilize what you've learned today about multiculturalism and social justice and to expand your own competencies? In what areas might you be able to grow? So obviously our own cultural awareness as counselors is huge. And so how can we become more aware of our own biases, and how can we grow in enacting social justice and advocacy in our communities and our spheres of influence?
That is a great question, Pierre, and I think it's one that's worth taking some time to really consider and look at. What can I do in my community? What can I do in my practice, in my workplace? I think about, mostly because I've been doing so much research on him lately, but I think about Mr. Rogers. His show was on in a time when, for example, people were throwing chemicals into swimming pools when African Americans were to have African Americans leave the pools, and it was really a horrible time. And one of the things that Mr. Rogers did was he put Officer Clemens, an African American male, as an authority figure in a recurring role on his television show, and he was one of the first to do that in children's television. And then he invited him into his swimming pool. Of course, they had a low budget TV set, so they had a little, the little blue kiddie pools. So Mr. Rogers was there, kind of soaking his feet, with his hose and his pool. And he invited Officer Clemens to get in the pool, with him to soak his feet. Officer Clemens said, "Oh, I don't have a towel or anything." Mr. Rogers said, "Oh, that's okay. You'll be able to use mine." And Mr. Rogers, basically, dried his feet. And, I think that's from a Christian worldview, we can see the parallel to Jesus at the Last Supper, kind of washing his disciples' feet. And so, he used his sphere of influence, as Pierre mentioned, You know, he used his neighborhood, if you will, to illustrate how he could make a difference in where he stood, and to let everybody know that we are all neighbors, and that he cared about all of his neighbors, and that